Does make me think of the Katy Perry song. I want to see your peacock cock cock, your
Oh
peacock cock
no.
cock. Yes. Welcome to Growing with the Stars, an astrology podcast to help you make the most of whatever is coming your way. Once again, I am Katie, and this is my co-host Kat, and we are back to talking about the moon and self-care and ways to look at your moon sign to help support you. If you missed our delightful, very informative first episode all about the moon and the different zodiac signs, please go check that out. And today we're going to just focus on the houses and what topics might come up and to kind of give you some ideas as you're looking at your own moon sign and where it is placed in your chart. Um, that is all I got as far as an intro. I don't know if I forgot anything, Kat, with my Gemini Mercury brain.
So we're back and doing houses, and we're gonna get into the circle today. The circle of not life,
The
but the
circle.
circle of stars. I
Yes.
guess it is the circle of life, though, isn't it?
Actually, truly is. I'm now gonna have that song stuck in my head the entire time we discuss this. So you might hear a Savannah, or maybe not, who knows? Uh, but yeah, just as a quick reminder, I'm a traditional astrologer. I'm usually gonna talk about houses as whole sign. If you have a different tradition, maybe you love Placidus, maybe you love another house system, like this is, we're just gonna talk through the general house significations today. Um, there's no bad house system except the one that like doesn't work for you.
So, like, what do you mean when you say like a whole sign? Like, what's a placidus? What's a this? What's a that?
Yes.
Let's give our beginners some info on like the cut up of our little pie.
Yeah, you if you want to get astrologers, if you want astrologers to argue about something, you ask about the house system and which ones work for them. Uh Basically, there's this thing when you look at a birth chart, you're going to see a wheel and you're going to see kind of slices of the pie, right? And there's going to be 12 slices. And those are the topic areas of life. And there are different methods for how to cut them up. One of the most common that we see is Placidus, which is a degree based system. And so, say you have, let's just say you were born where 23 degrees of Aries was the exact degree on the horizon. um, Placidus is going to typically, I mean, if I remember Placidus correctly, modern astrologers who use this, please correct me in a comment. They will start the first house with that degree and it will go for a specific number of degrees afterwards until you get to the second house. And they do a specific form of division that takes into the specific degrees of the ascendant, the IC, the descendant, and the midheaven. And that's going to have different signs potentially within a house. Sometimes you might have two signs in a house, sometimes it's only one sign. And that's a valid system that lots of people use and works really well for them. For the things that I do as an astrologer who relies a lot on like the early Greco-Roman texts, they were mostly using whole sign houses for things. And so what that means is let's just say you were born as well, 23 degrees of Aries, the entire sign or the whole sign of Aries would be your first house. And then the whole sign of Taurus would be your second house. And you just go around the zodiac that way. And so different house systems will change how you look at your chart. Um, and I kind of describe it more like kinds cooking styles. Like some people love measuring things with grams, the metric system. Great, do it, use it. Some people are really comfortable with cups and teaspoons and the tablespoons. I'm like, great, use it. It's when you start mixing and matching and it's like, well, it's 300 grams and 2 tablespoons of this other thing where it can get kind of messy. And so I was joking about the debate. I'm not really here to debate people on their house system. It's just what I use, what works for my methodologies, my techniques. I rely on whole sign houses. Lots of astrologers who I respect use various forms of house systems. There are so many with so many differing sort of points of view. You could go down a whole rabbit hole trying to describe them all, and they are very math heavy, which frankly is not my strong suit either, but they're important sort of points of view. Today, those points of view don't really matter. It more matters just, hey, whatever house system you're using, like as long as it resonates and works for you, like that's really what matters. Um, And if you can always play with your chart on like AstroSeek or astro.com with different house systems and their drop downs, and sort of explore how that changes your chart, changes how you view it. It's just it's a lot
Yeah.
of technical details
Yeah.
that aren't really relevant for how we're going to be describing the houses today.
Yeah.
But it might change, if you go to a reading with an astrologer, some might say, oh, well, this is your sun's in the 10th, and some might say, well, oh, actually, your sun's in the 11th. Um, and it's just, if you're just how the houses get cut up, um, to change in different systems. So
So in that regard, then, do you think that while we're looking at today in whole sign houses, we can still kind of say, okay, I mean, obviously, when it comes to everything, take what resonates for you and leave the rest. But if you're looking at today in whole sign houses and you're like, wow, that 11th house thing, but I'm also in the 10th, but you're like kind of,
yeah.
you know, on maybe the line. I know sometimes in some systems it does cross a little bit into it can cross into different territories.
Yeah, I mean, typically in whole sign houses, you can only be in one, right?
Yeah.
You can only be in one sign at a time. We can get into a whole discussion around cusps and why. Actually, if you want to piss off a group of astrologers, start talking about cusps because we love hearing that.
Yeah.
Um, but I think for today, we're gonna be talking about the houses. We're gonna talk about sort of things generally, like the moon generally placed in those different houses, what that might look like. And I think if you're really kind of the house systems really depend, it's less like what house system works best for me and gets into a much more deeper conversation, which is like what kinds of astrology really work for you and sort of your worldview. Because, like, that's then where sort of the house systems tend to get more particular, right? Like, if you want to get into like Hellenistic astrology and that early period, it's very hard to do without whole sign houses, right? And if you want to be getting into more evolutionary astrology, or some very contemporary kinds of astrology, you're going to need to be more comfortable with things like Placidus and some of those other house systems. And if you want to be more interested in maybe some of the medieval techniques, there are like other house systems that are a little less well known that you might need to be looking at, and be comfortable with. And so, or be willing to explore. And so I think I would like to say, like, as you're thinking about and looking at your chart and looking at where the moon is house-wise, like, see this as sort of directional. And maybe if it's not resonating, that's a really good excuse, not excuse, it's a really good reason to think about getting a reading, try to get maybe understand how different people are taking a look at your chart and help you better understand your moon. Um, I wish I had a clearer reason for that, but yeah, there's lots of different ways to kind of cut the pie. Um, and it's easy to overcomplicate it versus keep it simple.
Well, in keeping it simple today, using those whole sign houses,
Yes.
what are we looking at when we're talking about, the moon and the houses? Why does the house even matter to us?
It's a great question because the house really tells you the sort of genre of the story, and where the sort of story around self-care might really be showing up for you, or how self-care, what parts of your life it really shows up in, right? For some folks, self-care is a really public thing, which sounds kind of weird. But if you were maybe, I don't know, I'm going to just throw a very generic, not generic example, but throw an example out there. Like if you're trying to make sure I'm doing the math correctly, which is a very funny moment. If you're a Libra rising, all right, let's just say, and in whole sign houses, Cancer would be your 10th whole sign house, and you had the moon in Cancer, right? I would probably, in a reading with you, think about, what does tenderness and self-care look like from a legacy standpoint, from a career standpoint, from your public life. Whereas somebody that maybe has the moon in the 12th house, taking care of yourself, your emotions, your body is something that's very, very, very private, right? If you're still a Libra rising, but maybe you have the moon in Virgo. Both of your expressions are very valid, but the house will make its expression and sort of how it likes to express itself or what feels comfortable, perhaps, very, very different. And so that's where houses become so important. And that's where knowing your birth time, it's one of the most important things. If you want to read a birth chart, you're missing so much information if you lack the houses. Let's start with the first house, right? The first house, this is very much an understanding of very me, myself, and I. This is going to be very focused on the physical, taking care of maybe your skin, your clothing, or appearances is really going to matter, as well as like how is the body something that can be a place of comfort? How is it that like how you go through the world personally? How is that something that either you embody and or feel comfortable embodying? Um, when we think of ourselves as individuals, especially in like the traditional paradigm of a birth chart, the first house is really the me, myself, and I. And so I think these are the folks that often maybe feel the moon the most. Whether it's an Aries rising with the moon there or a Saturn, not Saturn rising, wow, a Capricorn rising with the moon and Saturn, it's going to have it's going to feel very personal and feel very tied to that individual experience. And so for those folks, I always like to be like, okay, what does physical comfort look like for you? How can this be like for these folks, like how is fashion something that creates safety and care for you? Like when do you feel like you get to be yourself? When do you feel like you're having to kind of put on a mask? Um, and or how could some rituals around, health and movement or the body make sense for you? Um, Always please talk to your medical practitioners and professionals. Um, it's more of a like a hey, you got the moon in Aries in the first house. Like how are you moving a little bit? You might need a little bit more energy output than maybe the moon in Taurus in the first house. Now, this it looks starts to look a little different. It's a little less personal once we start to get into the second house. It still is personal, but it's like not as physical. We get into things around possessions, money, finances. These are often the resources, right, that allow us to live our life, for better or worse. I often think for these folks when the moon is here, like this is when money and your possessions feels really emotional. It's either really nostalgic, like maybe you feel like you want to be able to like kind of hold on to things that remind you of sort of memories of the past or really great moments in your life. And also like folks that at its best really understand that money can have an emotional tie and at its worst can sometimes look like the dragon from The Hobbit who like I don't know. I always think of this very vivid image of that dragon who's like in his mountain, just like sitting on his hoard of treasure and like never spending it.
Oh yeah, smog.
Yeah, smog, exactly. And so, for these folks, there's a little bit of balancing of things, right? Which is like, okay, what of your stuff is really important to hold on to? And like, what are the things that you need to hold on to? And what are the things to release? When are you kind of going extremes in one direction or the other, which is like, so minimalist, you're not really supporting yourself, or you're hoarding so much and you're so fearful of spending, you're not actually taking care of your needs. Um, the emotional extreme sometimes, the moon moves very quickly, it can be very reactive. And so for these folks, I want to kind of be like, okay, what's your relationship to your stuff? And is it one that is serving you? Or are you feeling kind of like every time you're upset, you need to go on TikTok shop and buy something to like treat yourself? Um, I'm not trying to say that stuff shouldn't make you happy. If you got the moon in the second house, stuff is going to be an important emotional thing. But when are you doing it in a way that is healthy and fulfilling for you? And when are you doing it in a way that is avoiding masking or um, going to extremes that aren't actually serving you? So let's move on to the third house. And the moon loves to be in the third house. This is the house that she rejoices in, is the way we call it. It doesn't change any of the other sort of sign dignity and stuff, but like the moon gets to work on topics the moon likes to deal with. Um, most of the, I think all of the traditional planets have a house where they do this. Um, and the moon, of course, has like one of the most laundry lists of significations here, which I think is so funny. The third house is siblings, our neighborhoods, our local distance, like our local environments. We think short distance travel, education, but as well like spirituality and religion comes up here. It sounds a bit like a hodgepodge, but we think of it a lot of ways as the house that is sort of falling away from the fourth house of family and home. And so we think of it as like the area around the home, right? And that's why we would think of siblings, because siblings traditionally lived nearby the family, right? And also it's our local neighborhoods, right? These sort of local areas. And so short distance travel comes up here as well. Um, and we also get things around sort of third spaces like the coffee shops, the local pub, like those kind of community spaces often show up here. And it's called the House of Goddess. And so that's where we get the sort of spirituality and religion aspect that is very sort of intimate and day to day. Um, so there's a lot happening here. And when we talk about, okay, you have the moon in the third, what the heck does it mean? Like, how do you sort of navigate all of these? Um, the first thing I like to think about is like, what's your relationship to your local neighborhood, your local environment, your local community? Yeah, how do you connect with your community, with your local spaces? Do you have a favorite third place that you love to go to? Is there a kind of third place that you would really love? Um, what is your relationship to people that live near you and or to your siblings? How might you make time for those folks that you enjoy? Um, I also, for these folks, often say, like, I know everyone talks this big talk about big trips to like foreign places. And don't get me wrong, I love to travel. But for these folks, I might say, like, when was the last time you just took a day trip to like go to a regional park or explored a restaurant that was maybe in a part of town that you hadn't ever been to, or exploring in trips that are more close by and or would maybe be what we like a day trip or a weekend trip for these folks can often feel really refreshing. So when we talk, sometimes we also talk about spiritual practices. And this is like if it resonates for you, right? And for these folks, I might talk about like a daily tarot practice or having an altar in their house or lighting a candle. For some folks, it can be as simple as like 10 minutes of meditating. Um, when I often think about third house spirituality, I'm thinking about things that are a little bit more intimate, a little bit more local. It doesn't have the same big kind of pilgrimage, large landscape vibe that we're going to see in the ninth house typically when we talk about it. Um, so things that kind of feel close to home is really, I think, a good summary of the third house. And if you're kind of overwhelmed by all the choices, literally follow the ones that are exciting to you and speak to you. The thing that's kind of interesting about astrology is that, like, yes, it can have all of those significations, but most people will either pick one or two of those over a period of time, or maybe later in life, a different part of it comes up. It doesn't make your version of that expression any less valid. That your version of the moon in the third house is maybe you just love a weekly trivia night at your local watering hole. There's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with culture. Nothing wrong with a trivia night. Okay.
Trivia night is great. I'm
Trivia night
just
is
saying, like,
fantastic.
if the idea of like daily tarot
No.
does not speak to you, don't do it. Like,
Yeah.
that's all I'm saying. Like, you don't have to overthink it.
Some of the most solid advice I ever got was from a tarot reader. They were
Mm.
like, listen, you don't have to do it this hard way. Like your ancestors are telling you, you don't have to do it. You don't have to read all the books. You don't have to be like, do all the things. You don't have to get up and do a ritual at dawn, basically, like was the general like thing. And they were like, it just you have to figure it out your own way, right? Like you can't be like anybody else. You're only yourself. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean like that's one of those things too that like I'm always telling other people, but God forbid. God forbid, I take that advice myself. So, you know, go easy on
Ain't that the
yourself.
truth?
Yeah, go easy on yourselves, man. Sometimes things are small, but they're significant.
Amen. Amen. The next house that we're going to talk to, where you can do as much or as little as you like, is the fourth house. And this is the place when you're looking at the chart, this is like all the way at the bottom, right? This is the place that's most hidden underneath the earth, super invisible. If we're thinking about this from a very like literal version of like what was going on the moment you were born. And the fourth house is the place that is very private, right? It's home, it's family, it's our sort of hidden life, but there's a lot of like cultural history and lineage. And we also often see like fathers here, and or father figures, partially because 2000 years ago you did not have DNA testing. If somebody had a kid, you couldn't be like you could not confirm necessarily with 100% certainty who the father was, versus whoever carried the child to term, right, were considered mothers 2000 years ago, and they were very very evident typically who the mother was. You couldn't exactly hide that, um, in the same way. And so fathers tend to have a little bit more of a signification in the fourth. We'll talk a little bit more about mothers in the 10th. But family generally is seen in the fourth. Um, and so for these folks, if you have the moon here, like self care, it can look at something as simple as spending time at home or doing home projects. I see a lot of these folks that love doing a DIY project. Spending time with family, your definition of family. It does not have to be like your biological family, your chosen family, certainly counts here. Um, I also see folks really resonate with engaging in traditional or ancestral practices. So that can be kind of cultural practices. Family traditions are really important sometimes for these folks, or doing research or learning about their family or their cultural lineage can feel really resonating here. I think I had a client who had a bunch of stuff in the fourth house, and when it got activated, they did a whole bunch of research on their own genealogy. And I was like, "You're doing it. You're doing the things. Like this is very on brand." Um, and so the question I'd leave with you if have the moon in the fourth, which is how is your private life, your home, your lineage, like kind of your relationship to the past? How can that be a place of comfort and care that also supports you?
It's so funny. Anytime I hear family tradition together, my brain goes to that song. So don't ask me, Hank, why do you drink? Why do you roll smoke? It's so funny. It's called Family Tradition by Hank, I think Hank Williams Jr. And it's hilarious because we all like in my family love that song. It's just one of those things, but we also just sing it to acknowledge that we're kind of a little screwy.
That's so funny because my version of doing that is wanting to sing the Fiddler on the Roof song, tradition, tradition. And who day and night must hammer for a living, feed the wife and children, make his daily bread. And
Uh,
who has the right as master of the house to have the final word at home? The papa, the papa.
oh
Yep.
man, I do not I watched that. I think I watched that once and I was like, I cannot watch this ever again. It has destroyed my child soul because I was really small when I watched it.
Oh, yeah. If you don't know, spoiler alert, kind of a rough time to be a Jew in the Russian Pale when this musical is set.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe a little difficult. Just maybe don't show it to like your 8-year-old
I would
granddaughter.
recommend, yeah, I would recommend waiting till you're about 12, 11, 12.
Like, I mean, maybe do if they're mature enough. Just context.
Yeah. Yeah. So, speaking of musicals and creativity, we are going to go to the fifth house where we get to talk about well, some of the fun stuff. This is sex, creativity. Children come up here, a lot of just like play and games. As a moon in the fifth house, I think we are a very fun bunch. I'm completely unbiased on that
We are
statement.
totally a fun bunch. I'm not biased at all. I don't know what you're talking about.
These are the kinds of folks that and granted different, it shows up in different ways. Um, but self-care for these folks can look, like a little bedroom activity. Always like to say, keep it safe, keep it consensual, have fun. That's what matters. Um, but it can be, the making of children, or very differently, having time that you spend around kids. Once again, please be nice to the children and be safe. Like those two activities, very, very different. Some of these folks just really love spending time around kids and or doing things that they really enjoyed as kids, right? Like kind of continuing to lean into a little bit of nostalgia or their inner child. Um, but it can also be as simple as just making time for your hobbies, having fun. Um, as a as a moon in the fifth, I find that art journaling and sort of some of my creative projects can also be really cathartic for processing, and finding art and creativity. It can be a really healing way for me to process feelings, whether they're really good feelings or they're really difficult feelings. Um, so those are all sort of different avenues for this. But I feel like when I see the moon in the fifth, I'm like, you got to let your hair down. You got to have something fun that you're doing once a week. And if you don't remember the last time you laughed, that's what we got to work on.
Okay, good. We left a couple minutes ago. We're good. We're set. Fine.
We're ready for the rest of the week. Now, the next group, it sounds like a little bit of a shift, right, is the sixth house. And for these folks, there's a lot more to do with service or working with servants, a lot to do around health and habits, but also like work and animals. So for these folks, when the moon is here, self-care might look more like volunteering. It might look like spending time with animals, whether it's fostering animals or like spending time out in nature with them. I also see these folks really loving having like practices and habits that really feels nourishing to them, whether it's having eating certain foods or having a certain kind of movement practice that they really enjoy. Um, the thing I like to tell these folks, because they can get a little too much in giving to others, is like how how can the things that you do not only be in service to others, but also be in service to yourself, right? If you're not enjoying the service, right, or all the things you're doing, you're a martyr. This isn't the self-care, right? Friend, and I love the way she talks about her acts of service, her volunteering. Everyone thinks that she's like such a good person. We can't believe you do all these things. She's like, yeah, I do them because they're good for people, but I also really love spending that time and the time I get to spend around all these people, and like it's really recharging for me. And that's the thing I always want to like kind of double check with my moon in the sixth house folks. I'm like, is this recharging you? Are you feeling that not only are you giving, but does it feel reciprocal in some way energetically? Does it feel good for you? If it's not feeling good, that's when we need to reassess.
Don't do things that feel bad like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a difference between eating a little celery once in a while when you don't want to and like becoming bitter. And we don't want you to be bitter.
Don't eat so much celery. You never want to look at celery again, basically.
But yeah, a little celery is fine. But if you, yeah, if you close your eyes and see celery and you hate it, let it go. It's fine. It's just celery. I did not expect to commit to the celery metaphor that much, but
I didn't either, honestly, but you know what? Honestly, like thinking about celery, it's one of those foods that like I have been forced to eat on diets like in the past where people are like, this is good for you. And I'm like, cool. And then I look at it and I'm like, I never want to freaking look at you ever again. So like, yeah, like don't force yourself to eat the celery. I love celery. Love with a little peanut butter, just crunchy, crunchy snack. But when you force me to do it,
Yeah.
then it's harmful. Where does something become, anything, I think, and with anything, where does it, if it becomes harmful, even, you're volunteering, or going back, you're spending, right, for the second house, or, anything like that. Like if we're going hopping forward to the 12th, you're isolating, right? If it becomes harmful, that's when you've got to go, well, maybe I
Yeah.
need to take a look at this, because if you're feeling more pain than pleasure, that's not what you want.
Even also if it just makes you feel numb, that's a sign to like we need to reassess, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's lots of different cues that can kind of be something tickling at the back of your mind, being like, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe that's not right for us. And I also just want to say too, like I said this before, the moon is the fastest moving planetary object in astrology traditionally, right? It is moving through the zodiac every 27 to 30 days. Um, it's really, it's not surprising that wherever your moon is, that there's a lot of evolution and change in that part of your life. I see it all the time. Even if you have the moon in like beautiful grounded fixed Taurus, like change still happens, evolution still happens. And I think giving yourself permission to listen and learn both even as you start to dive into like enjoying a specific thing, it's okay that you're going to maybe pick it up or put it down. It's okay that you're going to really love, maybe if we go back to the sixth house, maybe for a while fostering dogs feels really good. And then there comes a period when there's a lot of stuff going on at work and you don't have the capacity for it. It's just you're not in a good place to do it. It's really okay to take a pause and, come back to it. Maybe you just go and walk the dogs at the shelter a couple times a week. Maybe that feels more doable. Maybe it's about kind of gathering supplies every so often for the shelter. Like you can still be responsive and supportive, but if your energy or things have shifted in your life and that's not serving you, it's okay to take accountability and to know when you need to step back and when you're ready to step back up again. Um, in fact, I think people would rather know that early than watch you burn yourself out.
Those 6 crochet projects can wait. It's okay. You'll find the 8 hook again. You'll be fine.
Exactly.
Hi, Betty. We got a visitor.
I love it. Speaking of pets, we have a cat, um, which as a cat lady, I stand. We are going to go on to the seventh house, which is typically not pets. I haven't seen that ever there, but is the place of committed partnership. This is the place where we see marriage, our best friends, but also like our close collaborators at work. When I see the moon here in the seventh, I often find that self-care is about spending time with our closest people. Sometimes, at its less healthy expression, when the moon is in the seventh, it can be focusing on taking care of those people at our own expense. But at its best, it's saying, I feel nourished and supported and renewed when I get to spend time with my ride or dies, my people that really get me, that are like are bound together with me. We see contracts in the seventh. And so that's what I'm saying. It's like people that we are committed to and not just like loosely friendly with. And so for these folks, it's like, hey, like when you think about your sort of the closest people in your life, you know, your friends, your, romantic partners, others, your work, your kind of the work bestie is like, what is the sort of give and take emotionally? Do you feel cared for? Do you feel seen by these people? And or do you feel like you're needing to constantly adjust or fix yourself in order to make those relationships work, right? For these folks, it's want to really say taking stock of your close relationships and how supportive and nurturing they are for you, and making sure those dynamics support all parties in that relationship is really important. The next house is a little tricky. Basically, he's the confusing. It's funny because I always think he's a confusing house. It's the eighth house, and this is another money house. Um, but it's a lot about taxes, debt, inheritance, things that we get from other people. And it's also the place of idleness. It's difficult partially because in traditional astrology and like traditional aspects, it's one of the blind spots to the rising sign. That's the eighth house, the second house, the 12th, and the sixth are seen as differing amounts of difficult. It doesn't mean that it's bad, but I often find these folks may not always have the easiest ability to access their emotional needs, their physical needs, because the moon feels maybe disconnected from them in the way that it's not sort of as easy to grasp as if it was in like the first house or in the fifth. Um, and so for these folks, especially because the eighth house has a lot to do with other people, right? It is money and finances and sort of our the interdependencies we have on each other. I like to kind of dig into, okay, how do you ask for what you need, right? In relationships, how has that worked for you? What doesn't work for you? What makes you feel tangibly safe with other people and secure? Like, how is resourcing an important part of relationships for you? Right. And that can be resourcing around money, but it can also be resourcing around time and energy. Like, I try not to be too capitalistic in my understanding of the eighth. It's easy to go there. Um, and also like for these folks, it is a place of idleness. How do you easily burn out? Are you tired a lot? And if that's the case, like how do we help you do less and to kind of hit the brakes before you've hit max?
Every time I hear that, I think of that scene from Sarah Marshall where he's surfing. Do less. No, you're doing too much. Do less. No, no, you got to do more than that. Do less.
Yeah, I think the eighth house has a lot of these like very traditionally like ominous statements. And it's one of the things that's really funny when you read old texts where they're like, this thing has to do with these horrible things. And you're like, is that about me? And I'm like, no, we're talking extremes. But also, I think in a world that is very used to very specific versions of what self-care and accessing our emotions and what we think about relationships, having the moon and maybe the eighth can feel challenging because you're also challenging social norms, right? You're saying like, yeah, like money, time, and energy, like our ability to sort of quantify how we show up with each other does sometimes matter. It's not about nickel and diming, but like if you're, I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of Reddit posts where the woman is like burnt out and exhausted taking care of like a bum ass husband. And then when she leaves him, the amount of freedom and time she has, even if she's still a single mother, is infinitely more because she has one less person that she has like essentially having to take care of.
One less child to
Yeah.
handle. Yeah.
Yeah. And the
Yeah.
eighth house, as out of visual mind as it is for us as individuals, is still like a piece of our lives and it's still like, no, that matters. How we show up for each other matters. So I hope that makes sense. The eighth
Well,
house is one of the difficult ones to explain. I always feel like I'm like,
it's a it seems like a difficult house in general.
oh, it's such a
Yeah.
difficult house.
Yeah,
It's a difficult
it's
house.
not one I've really delved into that much, but a little intimidating, I will say. So, eighth house moons, we send you love.
We send you love. We appreciate that you are literally highlighting, illuminating an area of life that a lot of people would like to not look at. Somebody's got to do it. We're going to move on to something that's a little more tangible, which is the ninth house. This is the house of God. right? So the third house is the house of goddess, the ninth house is the house of God. And this is higher education, teaching, learning. We often see like grad school and college here, but we also see like foreign places, religion, philosophy, like publishing shows up here. Um, and so I think about this as sort of like the big picture when we talk about religion. It's like religion with a capital R, or it's travel with a capital T. It's the sort of, I think often what we more think of when we're thinking of like larger scale versus the more intimate, private version, the day to day, which is the third house. When you have the moon here, um, I think a lot about like, hey, like, how do you learn about other places or travel? These are the folks that often I feel like I get it. Travel's expensive right now. I would love to go visit Japan, but like, you don't have to go to Japan to soothe and or support your ninth house moon. Maybe you just want to watch some Japanese, dramas or anime or manga. And I'm sorry for my anime and manga friends if I'm butchering pronunciation because white lady who's never taken Japanese. Right? So like you can culturally engage with other places without having to like have a passport. So I want to be like creative about some of this. Um, but also, I think a lot of it, there is also kind of, I think, religion and or spiritual practices that might come up here. Or what are you excited to teach and give to other folks? Is there something that feels really meaningful for you that might show up here? Um, just like, I feel like the ninth house is just so curious and it's so Little Mermaid coded for me. Like part of your world, like the curiosity about the other and wanting to explore feels very ninth house moon to me. And I think that's where I always like to start with these folks, which is what are you really curious about? And what would you love to learn more about? And like let's dive in there and start there and you're going to go on some crazy adventures. I can't wait to hear about them. But like it's going to start with something as simple as like I just got really into a specific kind of cooking and then 9 months later I went and visited and like took a master class in that kind of cooking. And now I host monthly things for my friends with that kind of food and I'm like that is so niche and I love that for you. Also, the ninth house often has to do with astrology and very traditional astrology. So, you might also want to learn a little more astrology. Maybe that's why you're listening to this podcast. Congratulations. You're doing self-care, my ninth house moons.
Congratulations, you're self-cared on accident.
Yeah. I somebody was, as Uranus has moved into Gemini, there's been some folks who are like, hey, what's this like if you had it in the ninth house? And I was like, I didn't realize it at the time, but my ninth house is Aries. And when Uranus went into Aries, I got into astrology much more seriously, which I still think is very funny. I didn't know at the time. I was just like, I got a podcast that a friend recommended, and I was just really interested in learning. It just sort of happened. And then you look back and you're like, that's on brand. That's on brand.
I gotta maybe take a look at when I started getting back into all this stuff again. It's like November, December. That would be interesting too.
Oh, yeah. One of my favorite things to do to really help you learn transits or techniques is you look at the past. You look at events that have already happened to better understand them and to like check a delineation. It's much easier to look at the past than to try to predict the future, which you could still do, but
I don't know what you're talking about, Katie. I can predict the future just fine.
we're gonna have to go offline when I
I'm
want.
gonna have dinner later.
10 out of 10. We're getting into the home stretch, and the next house is the 10th house. And this is, I talked about this very at the beginning, right? It's very public, our public life, our career, our legacy is up here. It is high noon of the chart. We also sometimes see mothers here, right? Because, like I said earlier, when, pregnancies happened 2000 years ago, it was always very, very clear, it was very visible who had carried the child typically, right? Like female bodies, people with the double X chromosomes were the ones that were typically carrying, they carried the kids. And so that was how they understood mothers. Um, so we see mother figures here, maternal figures here as well. When the moon is up here, I like to think about things like how how can your public life, your work, the things that you really want to leave behind in the world be forms of care for yourself? How are you part of that equation, right? Um, what are the ways that you want that to have an impact, right? What does that mean for you to have an impact? Like we kind of go into the sort of those aspects to make sure that, we're really including you in that conversation and how is it supporting you. I also like to really highlight the difference, and this might be mostly because I'm a Leo rising. But for these folks, is what's the difference between visible impact and change and having a legacy and needing external validation, right? Sometimes the moon in the 10th, it's just really important for these folks to feel seen, because if they're not being seen, is it even happening? If there's a visibility piece to it. And sometimes if it's you're too focused on things being visible, right? It gets the performance can feel very hollow. And so how do we sort of navigate what does it mean to feel seen versus what does it mean to do something publicly, right? What parts of the emotional self-care needs to be done in a kind of visible place? What parts don't? Uh, and so that's a nuanced conversation to really have, and it often will depend on other factors like, okay, what else is in the 10th house? What's the sign of the 10th house, right? If it's not the sign of Cancer, where is the ruler of the sign, which are all things to really get into in a one-on-one reading versus if we did that on this podcast, we would be here for years. um, but yeah, just because your public life needs to be meaningful and supportive for you doesn't mean that you have to do everything in public. Another moon placement, the next one that I think is very fun, feels very, very social butterfly to me, is the 11th house. This is all about friends, social groups, fans, community. These folks, self-care is like having community, it's being around community, right? It is their sort of the people that lift them up and support them really, really matter to these folks. Um, and I often see these folks really wanting to be embedded in kind of certain community spaces, and sort of social groups. There's an overlap with the third house, which is very interesting to me. It's a little less geographically specific, right? These folks might be much more comfortable with like online community spaces or large networks that aren't necessarily as geographically based like the third house is. Um, but for them, they might really find self-care, venting with friends, or they might also really find self-care and like being part of community and like having community support. If that makes sense. I don't know if I'm basically saying the same three words, community, over and over again.
Maybe watch Community. It's a great show.
Honestly, as an 11th house stellium, it is one of my favorite shows. Will back this up.
Oh, are we both 11th house stelliums? Are you also a Capricorn stellium in the 11th or no?
No, my Capricorn stellium is in the sixth.
Oh, okay.
I have the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter all in Gemini. I was I was always fated to have a podcast. I was doomed. I was doomed from the beginning.
It was meant to be.
Exactly. So yeah, 11th house moons. How do we support your social life? How do we get you out there? How do you find community? Where is your community? If you don't feel like you have community, let's build it. Let's work on it. That's the goal for y'all.
Hopefully your community isn't paywalled on Peacock.
There you go. Amen. Also, whoever named that streaming service, we need to talk.
We need to talk.
Terrible naming. I mean, I know why they did it, but also like, ugh. No, that one seems like an exec was like, it needs to relate to our logo. And they were just stuck with Peacock.
Yeah.
But it does make me think of the Katy Perry song. I want to see your peacock cock cock, your
Oh
peacock cock cock.
no.
Yeah, I know I'm a millennial. It's okay.
I have never you know what's funny is like I am such I'm a bum when it comes to music and stuff. I like never hear anything until people tell me about it.
This was very
So
like
that
the
was
peak Katy Perry era, I want to say, of like 2010-ish, the California Girls era. I don't want that to be the song that comes into people's heads. Let's put it that way. Anyways, the last but not least house is the 12th house. And this is the place of isolation. We sometimes see hidden enemies here, illness. It's just like kind of has big hermit vibes. Traditionally, you'll see like significations of like of hospitals. Traditionally, you see significations of things like hospitals, prisons, and ashrams. And before you freak out, a lot of this is just like, how do you take time away as like a moon in the 12th? I often find these folks like, you need alone time. There is the sort of need to sort of, in a world that's very public and processing everything kind of as it goes, the 12th house folks can be very socially different because there is a need to sort of process by themselves to kind of go away or to like go out away from the world and kind of come back.
I need you to know that every time you say in a world, my brain goes in a world like the movie guy.
Incredible. I'm just imagining now every time a 12th house person goes to take some alone time, it's just like in a world where
In
they
a
don't.
world where my moon is in the 12th house, I go to bed and pull the covers over
Yeah.
my head.
Ultimately, for you, for y'all, just because a lot of people are willing to put their every thought and thing online or do it publicly doesn't mean you have to do it. It's okay that you love your alone time. It's okay that maybe you feel really a calling to like meditative places or going out into nature, or kind of seeing your vacation as alone time. Like if that's what speaks to you, doesn't harm anybody, it's not harming you, like that's fine. It's if people are going to be weird about it, that's a them problem, that's not a you problem. And I'd also just say, like, I sometimes see these folks that, like, they feel really passionate about working on 12th house issues in a way that's really healing. Like, these are sometimes the folks that are really passionate about prison reform. These are the folks that are really passionate about making sure that, like, we have good mental health care, and, or, like, you know, places where people can go to get like health care that's actually effective. Right? These are people that are often working on these issues and feel like that is not just something that is supporting themselves, but supports others. Um, so just because you have these placements that are maybe quote unquote bad doesn't mean that you're a bad moon. It just means that you might be more willing to like focus on things that other people don't want to take a look at. And so let yourself prioritize alone time. Make sure you like have that as part of your day to day. Um, and like, yeah, screw what other people think about you is the is the main takeaway I want you to get from this.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks of you. Just be you.
And I would say that to anybody, right?
Yeah.
All of these two episodes are a starting point for figuring out what does self-care, how do you kind of engage with your own moon sign, your own the placement. And really, if you take nothing else away from this, the only question is really what helps you ground, be present, and process your feelings, right? Because it's not just that you can't pull from an empty well, but also like in times of great uncertainty, like that's when we need these practices the most, right? When it feels like our institutions are failing us, like I'm not saying that this work alone stops any of that harm, but is like a piece in helping us move through difficult periods. And if we don't have it, that can feel fucked.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, no, we're not like we don't say we have the answers. We just have some soothing, potentially helpful information, right?
yeah.
Based on, your birth chart. Good stuff.
Yeah. And in the resources, we're going to be sharing a couple of things as far as like self-care goes. There's a great episode of the astrology podcast called Radical Self-Care that we'll link to, as well as a few other resources that if you want to kind of dig more into this to kind of get a handle on it. Um, and we just hope that we'd love to hear what you think about this episode, if this makes sense to you, if this feels like it left you with more questions. Let us know in a comment.
And if you have anything else that you'd like to hear about, learn about, know about, um, if it's within the scope of the podcast, we can always cover it. Otherwise, you can always book with Katie for a reading. She's fantastic. And hopefully when we come back, and we cover next time, I think we'll be covering rising signs. So
We will.
yeah, something a little different. We're gonna take a little slightly different approach. So how do our rising signs do things? I don't know.
Yeah, it's gonna be all about the rising sign and how it helps you understand a lot of like your own personal focus and what does it mean to kind of go through the world with that. And also kind of create a little space to kind of keep in mind that there's lots of other ways people go through the world, and can be really helpful for a little compassion for people that don't think like you. Sometimes, as a Leo rising, it can be hard to remember that not everybody does it my way, you know? It's good for my ego.
Yeah, I don't know. As a Pisces rising, I tend to be a little bit of a dreamer, so not. But I also like to make those things happen.
Absolutely. We love it.
Yeah, I love it.
All right. Well, we will see you next time.